Welcome in everybody to Fantasy Pros. This is the Fantasy Baseball Podcast. It is me, Joey P, Joe Pisapia, and today it's time for the ultimate infield guide. That's right. There's no other guide as ultimate as this one. The Welsh and I are going to take you through all the infield positions, first base, second base, third base, shortstop, and even some catchers. We're going to talk about the top 20 guys or so at each position, talk about the tiers, talk about our favorite values, our favorite premium guys. Welsh, you're always my favorite premium guy. I just want you to know that. And speaking of premium, don't forget to go premium this year with all of our Fantasy Pros tools for fantasy baseball season and for free. Sync your leagues today. Did you hear that? For free, sync your leagues. Make sure you're utilizing all of the amazing tools for our draft software here at Fantasy Pros. And also, don't forget about the in-season tools as well. We have the best suite of tools that will help you manage all of your leagues, set all your lineups from one app on Fantasy Pros. It's about as good as it gets. And remember, our draft kit is live now, fantasypros.com/draft kit. So is our mock draft wizard, fantasypros.com/mock. Go ahead and run a million simulations in about I don't know. I mean, how many drafts can you do in an hour? I think I can probably do 30 in an hour.
A million would be a lot. Oh, I don't know. We should do that.
How many drafts can we do in an hour?
But we have to do our picks. We should almost simultaneously be see what type we could go. Yeah, I like that.
Well, I'll be using the Welsh cheat sheets.
I mean, if it was 5 minutes, in theory, it would be 12 drafts.
That's too much. I guess, though. That's too much. Well, not if I had multiple devices. See what I did there? Mind blown. All right, Let's get to the infield. Let's start at first base here, and obviously a place we're looking for power. We're looking for run potential, RBIs, all of the above. Let's start here with the expert consensus rankings. Freddie Freeman's at the top of the first base board, followed by Matt Olson, Bryce Harper, who last year came off the injury, obviously maybe a little too soon, as we were saying back in the summertime, but he's such a gamer, that dude. Vlad Guerrero Jr. looking for a bounce back, and Pete Alonso at number 5. Welsh, to me, this is the definitive tier of the top first baseman, because after this, we drop to Cody Bellinger, who has to repeat a very strong season in Chicago. We're still, as of recording this, don't know where he is going to play in 2024, and Goldschmidt and some others. I think it's Freeman, Olson, Harper, Vlad, Pete, Alonso. Your thoughts on this upper tier? Somebody you want to move in, somebody you want to move out of the top tier first baseman?
Okay, so I am going to argue it. Yes, you're right. Good. Except I do think we can split these. And I think you could look at this if you want to be a little bit more, analytical or fine cone. What's the analogy? God. I can't do it.
I'm at the top of the show. Fine tooth comb.
What is the fine
tooth comb?
Fine tooth comb?
What did you say? A tooth fine comb?
I don't. But what does that even mean? What is a fine tooth comb?
Well, you're asking the bald guy about the fine tooth comb. What it is when you're kind of looking for something, like when the kid gets lice in the class and they're trying to pull the little tiny.
No, I know the analogy, but the fine tooth comb doesn't.
I don't know if you do.
If you, well, I know a version of it. There's something in my brain. It's called a Welshism. So this, yes, it is like a 5 tier, but I think you can break it apart. And the top 3 are almost in there. And this is how I view tiers. This is how I've always took tiers. Is there's no way I would move the guy below above. So I agree that definitively these 5 are the core first baseman that you want. Bregman and I did this look at, you take Roto and you take what championship teams look like and what starters. And we took that, what did all the starters at first base cumulatively get? And the common first baseman, the type of first baseman you want is a guy that hits, I think, around 28 stolen bases, around 270, high RBI.
Home runs, not 28 stolen bases.
I'm sorry, 28 home runs, really no stolen bases, and then high RBI and high runs. So who are the guys that do that? All these guys do that. But there isn't a scenario where I'm going to put Vlad Guerrero, as much as I'm into him this year, above Bryce Harper right now. So I would break the Freeman, Olson, Harper as probably 1A, Vlad and Alonso 1B. And then here's the big thing, though. It's a pretty stark drop off on all these guys, but these are the core guys, all giving you big homers, everything you need. The only difference is number 1, who actually can get you great out of position stolen bases in Freddie Freeman. But I agree with this tier, by the way. This is how I tier them out. Not everybody has it, because some like Harper over Olson, some like Alonso over Vlad Guerrero, but this is actually my definitive first base run.
Matt Olson coming off a year with 54 bombs, by the way. I mean, come on. No, I'm with you. I would even argue even further, because I'm Italian, because I like to argue. Freeman, Olson, their own tier. Harper probably in that grouping as well, but maybe he's his own little, maybe there's 1A, 1B, and then 1C being Alonso Guerrero. Again, I just want to see Harper kind of bounce back completely, although, end of the year, he certainly looked more like himself. They hit 293 last year, 21 bombs, but I mean, I do agree with what you're saying. There's an elite tier, but there's a super elite tier within there. So if you want to call them the A tier and then the S tier is Freeman,
the
Olson, Harper.
Can we call them the A team?
We can. B.A. Baracus, Mr. T, all of those guys. I love
pity
the A
fool
team.
who doesn't draft medals.
For those of you who are too young for the A team, the end of every episode, they basically had a van or some sort of vehicle that they found and turned it into a tank and then took on bad guys. That was pretty much the show.
That's like a great day. Just like every day, just turning something into a tank.
I will tell you here. We should be turning something into a tank.
Well, these two are tanks, Vlad and Pete Alonso. The 1B tier, what's interesting about them is they are the positive projection side. Like Alonso put up huge, massive homers last year with bad batting average. Vlad really had a mediocre year. They are both big boosted players. I think it's the expected batting average to come back up for Alonso with 40 plus homers. And if you're looking at Vlad Guerrero, he is probably the biggest projection monster because everything was like relatively sustainable across the board. He just had poor results, better launch angle. He's projected to have almost 10 more homers this year, big run in RBI. So that 1B tier, maybe there's some queasiness that's a little bit involved, and that's why they're 1B, but they are heavily projected because projections are waiting over the last 3 years. But they're great. But then we're about to take a big old step off of the first base ladder.
We are. Cody Bellinger, again, great season last year, 2020 season. Can he repeat it? We'll see. The batting average bounced way back from where it had been in previous seasons. Paul Goldschmidt, I know the power dipped a little bit, so did the average, but I think the Cardinals just overall were just a team that just struggled last season. So I think Goldschmidt has another 30 home run season in him. Christian Walker in this grouping as well, back-to-back 30 home run seasons for him. I feel good about him. Tristan Casas comes in at number 10 on this list. 24 bombs for him last year. I know a lot of people are very high on him. I'm very high on Nolan Jones, also in this tier, and then Spencer Torkelson in this grouping as well, who was one of our favorite buy lows last year. If you recall, there were videos we did about Spencer Torkelson, leading off episodes we did about, hey, now's the time in Dynasty and in redraft to buy this guy because it hit rock bottom, and then the second half was great. 31 home runs, 95 ribbies last year. He hit just 234, but for me, it's Goldschmidt ahead of Bellinger. I would even take Christian Walker, possibly ahead of Bellinger, to be honest with you. Nolan Jones and Bellinger, we could have that conversation. Then Casas and Torkelson, I think, are close to each other. What are your thoughts here in this grouping? Do you think you want to move the tier or adjust it slightly?
Yeah, so I'm not super big into Bellinger, but I'm open to the possibility whatever he changed is the new thing. Like what he changed was completely lowered his strikeouts, but he stopped hitting the ball hard. Barreling, everything like went down. Hard hit percentage like absolutely plummeted. Those aren't great things for like long-term sustainable power, but it doesn't mean he's just not going to just be a really good contact hitter with pure raw power that doesn't strike out. But I think there's more variance with him and he's shown it. So I'm not super excited about him. I love Goldie this year. You look at Goldie's profile. He's another one of those guys underperforming, but to what degree? It just looked like he had a little bit less exit velocity. Launch angle kind of dropped across all pitches as well. I put that up to bat speed, and guess what? Driveline this year. He spent the offseason specifically working on bat speed at Driveline. So I really like Goldie in this front. Nolan Jones, you and I have gone back and forth with. I think this is I think it's some version of Bellinger, Goldie, Nolan Jones, Christian Walker, and I would say Casas. Casas is the one I would jump in here because I think I just did a social short talking about players that are going to boost their power. Casas is one of those guys I think that is going to do that. He's going to take a big step up this year, big hard hit numbers, good barreling. He does everything right. It's just more games, and he's projected at almost 30 home runs. So I think that is kind of a rough tier. So I said Bellinger, Goldie, Nolan Jones, Walker, and Casas is kind of, I guess, that's 2, right?
Yeah.
We're doing 1A, 1B, and then 2.
Yeah, that's fair. Something to that effect.
Roman numeral 3.
Spencer Steer, another guy who's hovering around this grouping. In fact, if you look over fantasypros.com for the MLB rankings right now, You can see that Steer is put himself into this number 12 overall conversation right now. Do you think of him in the same group of like, okay, if you're in a 12-team mixed league, that's about where your starting first basemen are? I mean, I know Josh Naylor, Yandy Diaz are also kind of on that bubble. Do you have a preference of Steer, Diaz, and Naylor in terms of ranking?
So I'm actually like a really big Josh Naylor guy this year. Josh Naylor, we're starting to get into the territory in my eyes where, boy, these are high plus RPV corner infielders. Like if you get these guys in the corner infield, you're doing awesome. But in 15 team, that's not what you can do. So if you missed out on first base, Josh Naylor specifically is somebody that I love because it's really high batting average, great hard hit numbers. Power is a little bit in question, but big RBIs he put up because he hits in the middle of the order. Steer is kind of in this same range, but I have a hard time, and maybe it's just more clerical about it. Like, I have a hard time viewing him as a first baseman. He's going to play in the outfield. There's a lot of potential platooning in this roster still, but he still puts up stats. He's kind of a 20-20 guy. So I like Josh Naylor a lot. I would then go to Spencer Steer for the stolen bases. And Yandy Diaz is kind of a little bit of the grown-up version of Naylor, but I think Naylor's upside is higher. So those guys do belong in a tier, but Yandy and Naylor are a little bit closer. Steer is a different animal. Love him as a corner infielder, though.
All right, so we've got basically our top 12-ish, maybe even a 15, again, if you're in those deeper leagues. I agree with you 100% on Naylor, by the way, looking at the FantasyPros projections, too. 22 homers, 85 RBI, 8 steals, 280 batting average. That's pretty solid numbers-wise. After that grouping, we're going to get into this next group here, which involves guys like Santander coming off another season. Again, you know, we could talk about who gets squeezed out maybe in Baltimore at some point, but he had 28 homers last year, 95 RBI. You got guys like Vinny Pasquantino, Christian Encarnacion Strand, who qualifies there. Rhys Hoskins coming off the injury, signing with Milwaukee, Alec Boehm, Nathaniel Lowe. Like, there's a lot of guys here that kind of are in this mix in the corner infield from the first base perspective spot. Is there one guy or two guys that stand out to you as players that you feel like, yeah, this is a really good value, or a guy that could really outperform his ADP?
Rhys Hoskins. Rhys Hoskins is absolutely that guy going to Milwaukee. You do worry if they like completely deplete the team, but you know, the last big run we saw with him, it was still good hard hit numbers. It was still solid double-digit barrel percentage. I think he's going to just kind of jump right back into the fold of who he was before. And who he was before was a dude that put up 27 homers in 2021, 30 homers in 2022. I think we can get back to that spot. Milwaukee's a good hitting environment. He would be one of my choices if I was chasing batting average. Pasquantino probably. I don't know if the power is going to get there, but that team is going to be a little bit more aggressive this year. They got guys that can run at the top, and Michael Garcia and Bobby Witt Jr. So Pasquantino and Rhys Hoskins would be the later guys.
All right, let's move on to the second base grouping here. And no surprise, at the top, you're going to find Mookie Betts, as you should. Ozzie Albies, our favorite guy last year, who we just said, I mean, it was just crazy. The value on Albies last year was so good. And you know what? I'm willing to pay the premium this year because I don't love second base this year at all. Coming off a year where he had 33 bombs, 109 ribbies, 96 runs scored, hit 280, also stole 13 bases. So if you can't get Mookie Betts in the top 5 picks of your draft, Ozzie Albies is a really nice consolation prize. After that, we move on to Marcus Semien. I think this is where the tier stops because after this, we're jumping to Altuve, and just too many injuries at this point for Altuve the last few years, the missing the amount of time. I still think he is a great player, but he does have a lot of tread on the tire. So for me personally, I'm going to knock him down. Maybe there's another like 1A scenario for people, but Betts, Albies, Semien to me is the elite tier. Do you agree or disagree?
Betts is the elite tier. He is his own tier. Sometimes these guys like Acuna, we'll do an episode we're talking about overall. Acuna gets his own tier. Betts, in my mind, gets his own tier. Then Albies and Semien, they occupy that next tier, that second round pick. I love Albies. Love the stolen bases. I love Atlanta's offense. I love the power. There's no doubt about it. Marcus Semien is consistent. If Corey Seager misses some time, we'll see, and he can get into some bad slumps. Here's the only thing that happens with me, because I disagree with you. I actually like second base. I think there's a lot of good later second base values, and here's what has happened to me multiple times in drafts. I pull the trigger, Albies or Mookie Betts I've done, and then I get this like, ugh, what's going on? In the 6th round, I'm like, Gleyber Torres is still here. Ketel Marte ends up falling. And I get this sense of like, oh man, I screwed up. I should have taken another position. Or with Mookie Betts, I move him to the outfield and I still draft Gleyber Torres. So I actually think there are quite a few second base options in general. It shouldn't necessarily take away from the good value of those top guys. But what I will say is those are the elite. And I think the tier differences, the gap isn't as big as some other positions. That gap, in my mind, between Alonso and Bellinger, that's a huge gap. My gap between Simeon to like Altuve, McLean, it's not that big. And then the tier difference going down to Gleyber and like Ketel Marte from those guys, it's not massive. So I actually kind of like the position, but it is Mookie. And then it is Albies and Simeon. And then, you're not having these big teardrops when we start moving to who I have, Matt McLean and Altuve. And I think the ranks also show that.
All right. So after Albies and Simeon, Altuve comes in at 4 on Fantasy Pros. Then Matt McLean, Nico Hoerner, Gleyber Torres, Ha-Seong Kim, Ketel Marte. So let's talk about this grouping here as we get from 5 to 10. At Bryson Stoppe and guy number 10. Is there a favorite of yours in this grouping? I know Nico Hoerner, you've expressed to me, when you're doing the Black Book write-ups for Infield, which Welsh wrote all those up there. You can go check it out on Amazon right now. When you were doing those, you had some concerns about Nico Hoerner being able to repeat his season. Kim was a guy who stole a lot of bases last year. So who do you like to target here as we get to more of that next tier, that next grouping at second base?
Yeah, you nailed that. I'm not into Nico Hoerner. Like that's not. I kind of want to be into Ha-Seong Kim, but there's a couple guys that I felt like they just did everything right and they just got the right bounce in some spots. And all I'm saying is I'm not sure Ha-Seong Kim is a high teens to 20 home run hitter. He might be a lower. And if the stolen bases tick down a little bit, Same thing with Nico Hoerner. Nico Hoerner is not a double-digit power guy. He is lifted up by what we should acknowledge, elite runs and batting average. But I'm just not sure, stolen base and batting average and runs kind of. But I just don't think the stolen bases are going to be completely repeatable, and it's a dip. And I don't like paying that price for those stolen bases there. I love Gleyber Torres. Gleyber Torres expected numbers across the board up. He stole more bases. He was closing in on 30 homers. I think we can get there this year. Gleyber Torres is a major target for me. And I think homerism aside, I like Ketel Marte because he's going to hit high in the Diamondbacks lineup between Christian Walker, Lourdes Gurriel, and Corbin Carroll. And he goes late. He just consistently goes late. He's not a big stolen base guy, but 20, 25 homers, big runs, big RBIs. He'll get moved into the 3 spot sometimes. So those Gleyber Torres and Ketel Marte are kind of some of my favorites. I pass on Nico, I pass on Ha-Seong Kim, and that's kind of my grouping.
Torres was my guy too. He actually had a 10-point higher XBA, 283 as opposed to his 273 average. Exactly. Also rose his OBP up to 347, which to me tells me he started to take a better approach at the plate, getting on base more, starting that evolution. Torres, we've been waiting a long time for him to really find this, really strong productivity level.
He lowered his strikeout rate to almost to the level of what Bellinger did, but while still being a significant power hitter. And he stopped chasing sliders, which was his big deal. He really cut down on how he chased sliders and made him such a better hitter. And he's going to carry that in, by the way, with a healthy Judge and Juan Soto. So, yeah.
Look, it's his best year since 2019, Torres. And I think if he can get back to being that player here consistently at this juncture in his career, we're all going to be very, very pleased with that ADP. The next grouping here, when you're looking at outside the top 10, Andres Gimenez, then Geloff from Oakland. You have Spencer Steer, Luis Arraez, who I know Welsh has feelings about. Luis Arraez, again, he is a batting average player. You say it all the time. Estrada, Nolan Gorman, Edman, my boy Edouard Julien, Jonathan India, you're not a fan of, Brandon Drury at 20, and then it's the Paredes and the Polancos of the world who are outside this top 20, maybe Brandon Lau. Here's my question to you, Welsh. This is why I don't love second base, which is why I'm looking to, if I don't get Ozzie Albies, Gleyber Torres is a good fallback. I don't mind Marte, but the rest of this grouping, when it gets a little deeper here, especially in leagues where you're playing middle infielders, I don't love this grouping. I don't feel really warm and fuzzy about them. Who are some of the guys in this 10 through 20 range that are targets of yours this draft season?
So one of the things we found when we were doing the what do you need out of your positions when you're trying to accumulate, and obviously it's like a roto conversation, but it can be applied to categories, maybe not so much points. that you need like premium stolen bases where you can, unless you're going to make up for it significantly somewhere else at second base and at shortstop. So Andres Gimenez is actually a player that I really like, where everybody is reaching for the sky for Nico Hoerner because he hit 290 and had the 40 something stolen bases. You can probably get 30 out of Andres Gimenez with more power and not a big major dip in batting average. I mean, it's different from Nico, but not one that's going to like completely deplete your team. So I don't mind Andres Gimenez, especially from a little bit of a speed deficient
Welsh,
team.
It's 10 less homers. I mean, 10 less steals and twice as many homers potentially. That's what you're looking at.
And it's Gimenez. It's probably like 50, 60 spots lower on the overall. Mm-hmm. I'm not looking. What is Gimenez overall? He's 112. Overall, Nico Hoerner 64. It's almost half the cost.
Yeah.
So you don't want to do this exercise all the time. Oh, this guy, blah, blah. But you know what? Gimenez has more power, almost as many stolen bases. You're going to score some runs, maybe RBI. Like, I think Gimenez is a great fallback, especially if you got maybe like, Judge early, or you got Matt Olson and you don't have big significant stolen bases. I love Gimenez. I love getting him there. I'm kind of down with Bryson Stott. You mentioned the Arise thing. The only thing I'll say is like, he is fine, but I can't fathom the oohing and the awing we do over a guy that literally does one category. He's okay in runs, but that's a 1.5 player. Now he's the best player at that one spot, but he doesn't get the treatment of Esteury Ruiz. But everyone, like, he's a better real life player than he is a fantasy player. He's better in points. He's an elite fantasy player in points. He's not in head-to-head categories roto. So I don't have as much interest in him, but this is also why that position is not the worst. You could suffice with Luis Arraez on your team as your starting second baseman, and he's a 14th off the board. I would just suggest against it.
Let's take a quick break in the action to tell you about Trophy Smack. Are you ready to make a bold statement in your fantasy baseball league? Show your league mates you mean business with the bling ring from Trophy Smack and stand out as the true champion you are. We've teamed up with Trophy Smack to bring you an epic giveaway that will take your league celebrations to the next level. To be eligible, all you need to do is subscribe to the Fantasy Pros MLB YouTube channel, your ultimate source for fantasy baseball insights and updates, and leave a comment on any of our videos. That's it. The best part will be announcing the lucky winner right here on the channel, so don't forget to turn on those notifications. That way you'll be the first to know when new episodes drop and when it's time to claim your prize from Trophy Smack. And now back to the action. Let's move on to the third base position. Jose Ramirez at the top again, coming off slightly down year from what we're used to with him. Usually we're well above the 100 RBI total, just 80 last year, but again, we can look at that Guardians offense and poke holes all day because it really just did not do a whole lot. In fact, it feels like that meme where they're poking it with a stick and they're like, come on, do something. But hopefully Naylor and maybe there's a third Naylor. Can you get a third Naylor in Cleveland?
There actually is. There is Josh Naylor, Bo Naylor, and there is another Naylor, Miles Naylor, who plays for the Oakland A's, who just got drafted.
That's right, there was. But Jose Ramirez, to me, Welsh, is still just above everybody because of stolen base potential. Even Austin Riley, back-to-back 35 home run plus. Like, if you want to say it's Riley, Devers, and Ramirez at the top, and they're all one group, I still have Ramirez slightly above those guys in my own tier because I do think, this year maybe we get back to that super elite first round level guy. Do you agree or disagree?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Like, again, tell everybody what's my deal with tiers. Would I take Austin Riley over Jose Ramirez? No, I would not.
No.
Would I take Rafael Devers over Ramirez? No, I would not. I'm not as speed hungry as some, or even as I've been in the past. It's just because there's a lot to go around. Now, I do think you should always focus on when you can get it elite and when you can step ahead of everybody else. But getting a guy that steals like 25 bases, I don't think that makes them way more of a priority than years before.
Look, of those three guys, Ramirez is the only potential 30-30 guy. Yeah, that's it. At the end of the day, he's a 30-30, 100-100 guy. And I think that's that potential alone, because he's the only guy really at this position who can give you that. I think it's, or at least that we're counting on giving us that potentially in 2044. He's his own tier. Gunnar Henderson at number 4, a guy that last year had a miserable first half, but was so good in the second half, he still scored 100 runs, still drove in 82, stole 10 bags, hit 255 with 28 bombs. Then after Gunnar Henderson, you have Elly De La Cruz, Manny Machado, Royce Lewis, and then, of course, Alex Bregman at 8. Now, I'm going to stop there and pump the brakes here because I think this is where big-time conversations can happen. Henderson, De La Cruz, Machado, Royce Lewis, Bregman. What's the Welsh order of these guys? Because I feel like it's going to be very different potentially of what it is right now on FP.
Okay, and now there's one caveat I want to do to this because I didn't get to say it. I think that Rafael Devers, real quick, might be one of the most underrated players. And I have seen instances in FBC specifically where Elly De La Cruz and Gunnar Henderson go ahead of him. And I think Devers is as great of a plan B to missing Riley or Jose Ramirez as there is with those elite hard hit numbers. Highest of his career, 55.1, second highest barrel percentage. I mean, he is just a monster. He's just a 30 plus 100 guy with high batting average that you love. So now you go from like the safest dude. Austin Riley and Rafael Devers are like the safest of safe third basemen. You know, you're getting awesome 4 categories. They're all going to play. And then you start coming down to like Elly De La Cruz and Gunnar Henderson. So you ask me, how do I have these guys set up? I've gone back and forth on the Gunnar and the Elly, and I will tell you, I continuously do that. I flip those two quite a bit. And I know some people are going to have Elly out. At this moment, I am prioritizing Elly over Gunnar Henderson. And I know I'm critical about Elly De La Cruz.
You are. I'm surprised.
But one of the things, especially when you pay attention to projections, and a lot of people have talked about, one of the deficiencies of Elly De La Cruz built in is playing time. And a lot of people talk about that. Yet you still see big numbers. You see like almost 20-40 out of a lot of projection systems. And his cost isn't as big in a lot of the leagues everybody here is playing. Like if you play in NFBC, it's going to be like a top 20 player, top 22 player. But that doesn't happen in probably 75% of most leagues because there is fear. Strikeout problems. If he does struggle, could he be sent down? They've got a plethora of great players that they could throw in there at any time. So it's not unfeasible that he could not be on this roster. But he also puts up absolutely top percentile hard hit numbers, top percentile speed numbers. And I think he's going to just continuously hit at the top of the lineup until the wheels fall off. So the reason he is down for a lot of these people saying he's overrated is because they are projecting lower playing time because it might fall apart. I'm going to take a chance. In 10 team, you can take bigger chances. In 12 team, you can take it. 15's a little bit dicier. I'll go Elly with those monster stats, even though Gunnar is pretty solid. And then Manny and Royce is the next kind of tier of this position. Manny also, by the way, looking like he is going to start the season, at least being able to DH is a great sign. So he should come up.
I mean, we had this conversation a month ago. I was like, this whole concern about Machado is completely overblown. If his ADP in early drafts and best ball or stuff like that's floating around there, just take advantage of it. Even if it was a week or two in April, who cares? I mean, it's going to be fine, especially with the DH in the National League the last couple of years. Lewis is the guy that I'm targeting in this group. To me, he's the best ROI. He gives you stolen base potential, which is something Bregman going right around that same spot won't give you. He gives you batting average, which could be higher than Bregman as well. So I'm fine with Alex Bregman. It's kind of like that. That's like a line I'm kind of drawing. I mean, if you want to talk about Nolan Arrenado, a guy who's been very steady throughout his career, I feel like Bregman and Arrenado are kind of, I'm fine with them. Like third base to me is one of the, deeper positions where I'm very comfortable looking late for these guys. If I end up with a Bregman, if I end up with an Arrenado, that's fine. But Lewis is the guy that I want to target because he gives the upside for the batting average and the upside for the stolen bases. And I think power-wise, he's going to be in that 25-ish range as well, just like those guys. But he's going to give me a little something extra. Now, he's got to stay healthy, but that's a big if right now.
I think he's in the above tier. I like Bregman a little bit more than me, and maybe that is also some of the points that sits in your head. Like I don't like Bregman as much as you. He's not in the tier. I respect
his floor. And I think often we get so wrapped up in the potential of the Elly De La Cruz of the world, who I also love, just like you. I mean, gosh, he was like the unofficial mascot of the show last year. But at the same time, especially if we're talking about salary cap drafts, right? If you're telling me it's going to cost me an extra $15 for that player, I'll take Bregman. I'll take Arrenado. I'll take, or even $10, potentially difference between him and Royce Lewis. Okay, I'll save the $10 and I'll take Royce Lewis.
Well, I think that's important. Like Arrenado is someone I target because he just keeps falling. Like Bregman kind of falls. Arrenado is the last of all of those. And I took him in my first DC I did. And I will target him because I think you can get back in, especially if this team kicks back, you can get back into a 25 to 30, 100, decent batting average player. I think he is massively underrated. I just don't believe Bregman has the power upside anymore. And he does have a floor, but I think like Arenado's floor to his ceiling just feels better than what Bregman provides. So like I'm just more down, I guess, on Bregman overall, but I do agree with you on Arenado. And in salary cap, you're doing anything like that, yeah, you do pay attention to the dollar amount. That is important. There's a huge difference of you getting Arrenado at $7 and having to pay $55 for Elly. Sure.
I would say it converts also to, the same concept of rounds. Like if you want to get that extra pitcher and slide him in there in those, mid-early rounds, there you go.
Which I do.
Which I tend to also, because that's the range where I like the pitchers so much in that ADP. So to me, it makes a little bit more sense to wait potentially on that. Outside of this top 10 now, you're going to Josh Young, Spencer Steer coming off a great season, qualifies everywhere. Which is good because you figure get him in the lineup. Max Muncy, who I don't care how many home runs he had, I'm not touching him with a 10-foot pole. Jake Berger coming off a surprisingly fun season. Bohm, Noelvi Marte, Yandy Diaz, Cabrian Hayes, who I don't know why we're still chasing that. And then Paredes, Nolan Gorman. I know some of our friends in the industry still high on Nolan Gorman too. 27 bombs, still strikes out a lot for me. But this is the thing. It's like I like third base. Let me rephrase. I love third base when we get about 10 deep. After that, I don't like it as much. I think this is where the drop-off gets very steep. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think versus starters, like when you look and you're like, oh, mid-tier third baseman, I got Nolan Arrenado or Lewis, and then the lower on a 15 team is like, they're like, I'm starting Alec Bohm. Like that doesn't feel very good.
Marte can be a great player. I do. I think Noelvi Marte has a lot to offer. I think Diaz is a player, we saw the best of Diaz last year, career high 22 home runs, hit 330. Big fan of his as well, but he's, plays 137 games every year. So it's like, I'd like to get a guy who's playing 155.
Yeah, well, a lot of these guys, what's weird is like Bohm, I think is good batting average, but low power. Yandy Diaz can be the same thing. Really good batting average on base skills, but the power doesn't really go. Cabrian Hayes, he started hitting the ball harder, tapping into those expected stats, but he steals bases, doesn't have big power. So it's like, you want the consistent big power bats. You've got to go a little bit higher. I know you hate it. I like Max Muncy still. I'm still going to take him. I do think you have to pay attention to the build because the batting average could be a problem, but he had a 235 expected batting average where if he's hitting 230, 240, you can live. He had he had a top 10 percentile expected slug this past year. Huge walk still, big power numbers when the batting average struggled, and it's the frickin' Dodgers. Like that team is ridiculous, and current roster resources got him around 4 or 5 in that lineup. So RBIs are going to go over 100. He hit over 100 RBIs while hitting garbage last year. So if you see an improvement, Max Muncy might be a really great big power bet that you can't get in later rounds, but you do got to pay attention to like, what's the rest of your build? You don't want like the Ellys, or you don't want like super low batting average, or you're going to end up punting the position. But Max Muncy is probably a target for me. But again, I will say, I want to cheat a little bit. Like I love these guys as my corner infielders. I love the idea of Max Muncy as a corner infielder for the flexibility and not as a starter. So I am prioritizing getting a higher third baseman. Nolan Arrenado is kind of my cutoff of what I want at third base. If if I have the choice. Sometimes you don't. In deep 15-team leagues, you're screwed. But in 10 and 12-team leagues, I don't want to let the position fall off because I'd rather take the elite guys, and then depth I can play at the corner spot. Max
Muncy had a great April and a great July, and everything else outside of that was... We're talking, he hit 111 in June. He hit 186 in May. I mean, 217 in July, 226 in September. Like, if the power starts to drop off at all, it's going to be a dangerous slope. I'm just saying. Yeah. Let's get to shortstop because that's a lot more fun. Bobby Witt Jr. at the top. Trea Turner at number 2, Corey Seager at number 3, Francisco Lindor, another guy last year we talked about. Why is Lindor being faded so much in drafts? It was stupid because he had a 30-30 season. I know he hit 254, but I don't care. 98 RBI, 108 runs scored. He is an elite fantasy player still, folks, even if the Mets are far from an elite team. That to me is the grouping, those 4 guys. I assume you want to put Bobby Witt on a pedestal above them, though, yes?
Yep, I'm putting the Witt on a pedestal for sure. And then Turner, Seager, and Lindor are their own.
Yeah, and I think that makes a ton of sense. I feel very comfortable with that. Lindor, once again, if you're talking about salary cap leagues, maybe the best value because he probably will come the cheapest of them, most likely. The Turner cost is going to be interesting this year because, at the end of the day, you step back and you look at what happened. And I know, people were just wringing their hands most of the season. But at the end of the day, still was a 25 homer, 30 steal guy. as we talked about many times here on the show so far this year, the evolution or re-evolution and reinvention of the game with stolen bases being so much easier to find. Is Trea Turner still, in your mind, an asset people should be chasing? Or are you better off, I don't know, kind of sitting back and waiting if you don't get Bobby Witt and maybe going with some other names we're going to talk about on this list that are going to come at a cheaper cost?
Man, I wish he didn't ask it like that, because it's a great question. I kind of think I'm not into Trea Turner, like to what you're saying. He doesn't provide elite stolen bases. Power definitely upticked. It was a little bit streaky. Like, he's a great player. But like you mentioned, Corey Seager. Corey Seager is going to be a value this year because of that hernia surgery, which the expectation is he's going to be ready for the opening day, because he's just, going to ramp up, wasn't going to play a whole bunch, and he can DH for the team. And he could end up being a value. So here's the problem. Can Trea Turner still return his value? Yes, of course. I think that's a possibility. But when you start to look at the returns in other spots, Corey Seager now going from where he was in the high teens to, in a 12-team league, he's in instances going in the third round. I'd rather have that. Same thing with Lindor. Lindor, between a second and third round player, I think the return is better for the big bats we've talked about that you can take instead of Turner. And then you go down the list, there definitely is value. I mean, shortstop 9 to shortstop 12 on this list is my have to draft every single team this year player. So yes, I think without the big hardcore eliteness, he's just a totally fine player that, to me, gets lost in the wind a little bit, and I don't prioritize him anymore because he's not like 50, 60 stolen bases.
So Gunnar Henderson at 5 over on Fantasy Pros, then Bo Bichette, whose stolen bases have been cut in half 2 consecutive seasons, by the way. So that's a guy, the re-evolution of the stolen base hasn't gone in the right direction. Yeah, so that's over. Elly De La Cruz, CJ Abrams, a guy who we talked about last year on the show being one of those great values that's going to cost you nothing to find out. And guess what? 47 stolen bases later. I know he's a divisive figure. We'll talk about him in a second. Matt McClain at 10, Nico Hoerner at 11, and then O'Neal Cruz at 12. I agree with you. If you're going to take a shot in the dark here as you get later, why not O'Neal Cruz?
Yeah, and I've said it like a gajillion times over. It's so annoying. Someone tweeted me, I think, like as we were doing this about there's going to be no more value in O'Neal Cruz.
Already, man. Just shut up.
I don't blame them. Again, if I can double dip,
by the way, who tweeted Welsh? Just
yeah, it was one of your burners. If I can, cheat again, I love the idea of O'Neal as my middle infielder. It's unfair to others. That's what I love about it. If you do it, you might be taken away from another spot. So it just might not be ideal, but he is the player I want to draft on every team, even if I have a shortstop, because there's obviously some injury worry. So if I have the ability, I think I've said this on one of the episodes we did, Bo Bichette and O'Neal Cruz might be an incredible pairing. Bo Bichette, high batting average. You're going to have good run, good RBI totals. If the power comes back, he doesn't steal. You could pair him with a Cruz that might have a deficiency in batting average, but he's going to hit for power. He's going to have stolen bases. I am more aggressive than any other position, trying to get 2 top 12 to 2 top 15 shortstops, 1 to start and 1 in my middle infield. And it's usually not Bo Bichette, unfortunately. It's usually not Abrams because of the high cost. It is something more like I took an elite one and then I take O'Neal Cruz later. And if that doesn't happen, the other pairing I love is a player we haven't talked about yet. I would go O'Neal Cruz and Xander Bogaerts. So those are kind of my pairings.
For me, you jerk. All right, so Kim at 13. Bogaerts was the guy that I was all hyped up to talk about.
You could still be. Do it.
No, it's not the same now. But look, 1919 season, 2020 basically. Last year, you remember, Welsh, I was like, he's being overdrafted last year. And here's the perfect example. Like, it's not that I hate the player. I hated the ADP last year. And he drove in just 58 runs. He did it 285. He was fine. But, we got to get those RBI back up. We got to, get that working a little bit. But to me, Bogaerts is that perfect guy where if I'm going to wait on shortstop, Bogaerts is the dude for me.
I think we have our first shirt of 2024. Don't hate the player. Hate the ADP instead of the game. I think that's our first Fantasy Pros shirt. Let's do it.
Among other things. I'm full of a lot of stuff. Xander Bogaerts at 14. Dansby Swanson comes in at 15. Not surprised with the drop-off there. Another guy, too, where the rules changed and he stole less bases, so go figure. The batting average went back down to the 240s after being at 277. So, look, Swanson, you maybe adjustment to Chicago, whatever it is, the power was still there. He's also fine. Willie Adames, another guy who, I think we all look at in kind of this. These guys feel like a clump to me. that I'm okay with. And that's the thing. It's like shortstop for me. It's like, if I don't get Bobby Witt or Lindor at a good price, I'm willing to bargain shop here for Xander Bogaerts, even Swanson. I've watched a lot of Anthony Volpe in person, and I know he's a much better player than what he showed last year. And I would not be surprised, even with all of his struggles, he was still a 2020 player last year. His batting average is going to be much better this season. I'm telling you, he's just a much better player. I think he just pressed so hard last year. He is a very Dustin Pedroia-esque sort of guy in terms of makeup and in terms of game. I know other side of the plate, but still, like, when I watched him, that's the kind of player he reminded me of. And I think he is another one that I'm circling late in drafts, and I'm going to take another shot at Volpe.
Listen, dude, if I screw up this O'Neal Cruz thing and it gets too high, Anthony Volpe might be that next version. Yeah, it could be an easy 25-25 guy. He has proven to hit for average in the past, and he has overcome batting average issues in a hitter-friendly environment. I don't think it is ridiculous to say that Volpe, if you look at value at this point, might be one of the best values on the counting stats that you can get. So again, go take a safe one. Get yourself a Xander Bogaerts if you missed out, or you go super high and get a Corey Seager. Come back later, middle infield, get Anthony Volpe. I love that idea.
Bogaerts, Bogart, it's Harry Potter. What's your Patronus? Yeah, yours is Rico Prono.
Show me your Patronus. I'll show you.
But seriously, I like that. The Volpe is the secondary guy with Bogart. Bogaerts has that floor again, which we need to respect the floor a little bit more. I think it's just something that in fantasy baseball, sometimes we get too locked into projectability and not enough about, the Alex Bregmans of the world or the Xander Bogaerts of the world. Those guys are just going to win you leagues because they're coming at really solid ADPs. And it's natural progression because the youth of Major League Baseball the last 2 to 3 seasons has been off the charts good. So there's that anticipation of wanting to be ahead of the curve all the time that we sort of neglect the proven assets. And it's something I think that this season, the way the ADP structures out, totally like that. Let's talk about the catchers. We'll get these guys in here. Adley Rutschman, he is the one catcher. No debate about that. Yes?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Now, you're putting him in a tier, or are you going to put Real Muto, Will Smith, Contreras with him?
Adley is in his own tier, and then the next tier is empty because I wouldn't take them. And then the next tier after that, the third tier, is where we'll start to consider some players like.
So where does that start for you? So it's Real Muto, Will Smith, Contreras. Stop me when you want to start drafting somebody.
No, it's Real. That I want to start drafting somebody? Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. So start over because I'll speak up. This is like that
game on The Price is Right with the little yodeler guy as he continues to go.
Okay, so start at the very tippy. Start at the very tippy top, and I'll yodel when I'll take a guy.
Okay, perfect. Even though we're going down the hill, it's the metaphor still works.
Yeah, they got it.
So Rutschman, we love him. After that, Real Muto, Will Smith, number 4, Contreras, number 5, Diaz, number 6, Cal Raleigh, 7, Sal Perez. You're really going here. Sean Murphy at 8, Wilson Contreras, Francisco Alvarez. Yeah, let's go. Francisco Alvarez, let's talk about him. He can't finish last year with 25 bombs. I know he hit just 208, but again, a better hitter in the minor leagues that we saw in the major league level. This is another player that we already seen the power. Now we just got to put the rest of the game together. And I always think it's tough for rookie catchers, young catchers. They're managing pitching staffs. They have a lot on their mind. Offense tends to come a little later for these guys. So why do you like Alvarez so much?
Yeah, he's gotten into incredible shape this past offseason that he has spent the entire offseason working through, trimming down, which is going to just improve more bat speed. You had power last year. You have small sample size to improvement into a sophomore year. I think he's going to take a big, big step forward. He is an offensive first catcher. He always has been. So the point of this, I actually was yodeling at Wilson Contreras, but Alvarez was the same thing. I want late catchers. If I had to pick one higher,
I thought I was going excited.
No, but it was. I kind of was actually going like, do I want to do this Alvarez to Contreras? I want both of those guys. And actually, Alvarez is a dramatic target, but I want Moreno, I want Alvarez, and I want Contreras because they're going to go near the bottom. And I think the difference between them and what you're getting at the top is minute. I don't think it is big enough to pay a top 100 cost. Now, last thing, real quick, the cost is inflated because of NFBC. I say this all the time. So the rankings of catchers look weird and it screws up ADPs because they are 2 catcher leagues building them up. There's one catcher in the top 10 I probably reach for in a single, and it's Yanier Diaz because of the big numbers with the Astros. But Alvarez, Contreras, Moreno, O'Hoppe, Garver. Those are my targets in 15-team teams later. 2-catcher leagues are different, of course.
I'm surprised you put Moreno in that conversation with Contreras and Alvarez, just because
best batting average hit.
Well, I guess that's the whole thing. It's the batting average, give up there.
Power is going to come. I fully believe it.
Early.
I think you're going to get 17 to 20 this year. He hits high batting average. He might even hit 3 for this team. They did it in the World Series and they did it in the playoffs. And if he gets back into that spot, you're going to have RBI numbers come up. They love Moreno.
If he hits 300 or 285 with 17 homers, he's going to be the number 3 catcher on this list at the end.
And it is possible. of all the catchers on this, I think he's the most likely to be one of those tippy top guys. Plus, he can steal a little bit. Moreno's an incredible athlete.
So Heim's at 12, then O'Hoppe, who you mentioned, that's a guy that I like to target late too. Yeah. In fact, in single catcher leagues, give me O'Hoppe, give me Alvarez. Moreno is fine too, especially in points, because I do like the batting average in head-to-head points leagues. After that, you're going with Ruiz, Bo Naylor, Mitch Garver, Campusano, Stevenson, Kirk, and then Diaz in Colorado at 20. Danny Jansen just outside the top 20. But in 2-catcher leagues, for those of you who are still playing them, Welsh, what's your approach? You just trying to hammer that middle, or do you want to just, kind of take one steady guy, maybe one reach, and then one, star scrub kind of thing?
So my 2 DCs, one of them I took like a middle guy. I'm trying to remember who. I think it was Sean Murphy who fell. And then I ended up taking a later guy, Mitch Garver, I think it was. Mm-hmm. And then in my other one, I waited really late and I took Luis Campusano. And I ended up, before he signed, I took Gary Sanchez. And Gary Sanchez signed to be the backup in Milwaukee. But don't look now, because you're not going to pay him what they did for him to not play games. He might catch. Contreras has played in the outfield before. I could see them switching it around. So the bottom line is, in 2-catcher leagues, I'm not going to pay up for 2. I will be fine for paying for 1, but I'm probably hitting one of the middle tier guys, targeting Yanier or Murphy or Salvi, or like we said, the Contreras Alvarez. And then I'm going to push a little bit down. Give me a Mitch Garver who's going to DH for the Mariners, or Luis Campusano who's going to start for the Padres. That's my 2-catcher strategy.
Well, there you have it, folks. So that's our rundown of the ultimate infield guy. But who are your favorites at each position? We want to hear from you. Drop your comments below in the YouTube comments there. Subscribe to Fantasy Pros MLB channel too, and make sure you ring the bell for notifications so you know every time a piece of content drops here on the channel. We've got the top 10 list, we got the top 12 list, we got the short form videos. If you have no attention span, like Welsh, sometimes who drifts off in the middle of anything I'm saying, which I don't blame him most of the time. Also, all of the podcasts, all the mock drafts, everything's going to be here on the channel, including leading off starting, I believe, in April, maybe March. I don't know. We'll see how things go here, but we'll be live every single day here on the channel for you, talking fantasy, talking wagering, talking baseball every single day. Beautiful time to be alive. That'll do it for us, but the story of the game goes on. For the Welsh, I'm Joey P. We'll see you next time, kids.